Thank you so much for joining this fair and ethical data collection for collaborative polar research workshop co-hosted by the Polar Science Early Career Community Office, or PSECCO, and the Arctic Data Center. Um, we will kick off the event with a few introductions. So, hello, I'm Mariama Dryak-Valleys. I'm the director for PSECCO, and I am joined by Madison, the PSECCO event coordinator, who hopefully will be giving a little wave. Um, Madison is labeled Madison Payne Pasecco. She will be acting as tech support today. So if you run into any bumps along the way, especially with regards to breakout rooms and whatnot, feel free to directly message her and she'll help you work through it. We're also joined by Nicole and Angie with the Arctic Data Center, and we'll be hearing from them in a lot more depth in a few minutes. They are the stars of the show today. But uh, let's do a couple of introductory things before handing it off. As a reminder, at the core of PSECCO is building welcoming environments for everyone, and we expect for all PSECCO events that attendees adhere to PSECCO's community guidelines when interfacing with others on the call, both in the chat and in breakout rooms. So if you're not familiar with those, take a look at the link to those community guidelines posted in the chat. And there's a glimpse of kind of the overview of those guidelines on the screen here too. Many of us here do polar science in locations across the United States and beyond, with research focused on both poles and in high alpine regions across the world. And we think it's important to acknowledge that much of that science takes place on the unceded traditional territories and ancestral homelands of Indigenous peoples, and that some of the research done in these locations has historical roots in colonialism. With this land acknowledgement, we celebrate the many contributions of Native peoples to our understanding of the polar regions and recognize the sophisticated and intricate knowledge systems Indigenous peoples have and continue to develop in relationship to their lands. So we will I'll conclude my introduction with doing a short overview of the call, and then I'll hand it off to Angie and Nicole. Welcome. That's what we've just done. We've also done some introductions. The next part of this workshop will really center, as I said, Angie and Nicole with the Arctic Data Center presenting on fair and ethical data collection. So it'll be kicked off with an introductory lecture part of the call. That'll be followed by a 20-minute breakout activity, and then we'll come back together for a full group discussion. And you'll get more guidance on this from the ADC folks in a second. But then also, please stay on for the end of the call where we'll close up, share out resources, tell you what to expect from us after the workshop as well. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Nicole and Angie, and I hope you all are as excited as I am to hear what they have to share today.
Thanks, Mariama. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole. Today we're going to be, as Mariama said, talking about fair and ethical data collection for collaborative research. We're from the Arctic Data Center, but we're focused on both poles here. So don't run away if you're not Arctic focused. Quick introductions. Like I said, I'm Nicole Greco. I'm a community engagement outreach coordinator for both the Arctic Data Center and the NC's Learning Hub. And then Angie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, and then I'm Angie Garcia. I'm also a community engagement outreach coordinator at the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, specifically working on the Arctic Data Center and Data One projects.
All right, so a little bit of background about the Arctic Data Center. We're the primary data and software repository for the Arctic section of NSF's Office of Polar Programs. So data repository basically just means like a library for data, but we're a lot more than just a repository. So our mission is to help researchers preserve and discover all products of NSF-funded science in the Arctic. We have a lot of different things going on. So we have the tools and infrastructure behind the data. We do a lot of training and outreach like this one. We can do data rescue. So if you have data sitting on a hard drive somewhere, we can usually help with that. We have support services for when you upload data to us or you want to find data. We're a data archive, and then we also have data discovery portals, which kind of are these fun little websites you can make that aggregate all of your data products in one place and provide some context behind it. Um, so despite being funded by NSF and mainly being an NSF data archive, I also want to note that anyone is welcome to submit data to us, whether you're funded by NSF or not. Um, all right. So the Arctic Data Center hosts data across more than 60 disciplines. Some of the most common ones are shown here, like oceanography, cryology, soil science, etc. And we have data from most scientific fields that you can think of, and we're continuing to expand all the time. Just this week, our repository almost doubled in size with one data set, so super exciting. Um, and I know that we have some folks on the call who don't necessarily work in the Arctic, so we wanted to include some external resources as well. So if you work in the Antarctic, you might have heard of USAP DC, which is the Antarctic equivalent of the Arctic Data Center. And then also some international resources include the Polar Data Catalog for finding data, the UK Polar Data Center, and then the International Arctic Research Center. So check those out if you have a chance. All right, so that's a bit of background of who we are. And now we kind of want to get into the main topic of the workshop, which is fair data and data ethics. So with the rise of open science and more accessible data, it's become increasingly important to address accessibility and the openness of data. And the FAIR principles are how we do this. So the FAIR principles focus on how to prepare your data so that it can be easily reused by others. And it's a set of standards to use when curating your data. So we're going to get a bit more into what these different letters mean. So FAIR is all about making sure that your data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. There's historically been this hesitation to share research data, but I think there's been a big switch in the research community, kind of realizing that data is the most useful when others can find it and understand it and reuse it. This is especially important in polar regions where data collection can be more limited than other regions. So sharing your data is a good thing. All right, and digging a little deeper into what these letters actually mean. So the F in FAIR stands for findable. So making sure that your metadata and your data are easy to find and can be used by both humans and computers. So important things include making sure that your data set has a DOI and that it's indexed in a searchable resource like a data catalog. The A in FAIR stands for accessible. So once someone is able to find your data, they should be able to access your data and it should be easily accessible. So the Arctic Data Center, for example, is a fully open platform. It's also fully free to upload your data to us. We find those things are really important to limit any barriers to sharing your data. The I stands for interoperable. So this is making sure that your data can be easily integrated with other data for analysis, storage, and processing. So this mainly has to do with metadata, which is kind of the data that describes your data. And it's using kind of a formal, accessible, and broadly applicable language for storing your data. So making sure that it's easy to find. And then the last letter is R for reusable. I think this one's super important. So your data should be really well described so that it can be easily reused by other people, and whatever you did in your research can be replicated by others. So making sure that your data lives on past your own project. All right, and then moving a little bit on to ethical research practices, I wanted to talk about the differences between regions that you might work in and what this might look like. So similarities and differences between the two. So the primary difference between Arctic and Antarctic ethical considerations is really the presence of indigenous and local communities in the Arctic and subarctic, and the lack of these groups in Antarctica. It's a common misconception that working in a region without indigenous peoples means that there aren't any ethics to consider. There are still a lot of them. So some of these include minimizing your environmental impact and preserving the biodiversity of the area, making sure that you follow any permit requirements, researcher and local community safety, so doing safety checks at the start of your project, sharing knowledge with the global scientific community and the public, and then human and animal ethics, which are applicable everywhere. So these are just some things to keep in mind as you're doing your research if you haven't really thought about them in the past. And then we won't cover these principles today since they're not as applicable to the Antarctic researcher community, but the CARE principles were developed by the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, and they represent the human side of data. So they promote the right for Indigenous peoples to control data pertaining to them and their lands. CARE stands for Collective Benefit, Authority to Control, Responsibility, and Ethics. So if you work in the Arctic or subarctic or elsewhere, we highly encourage you to learn more about the CARE principles, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have about these at any time. On this subject, one way to ensure your data is accessible to Indigenous communities is to actually publish your data on Indigenous-founded data repositories. So we listed some of those here. And I also want to note that while we're talking about the FAIR principles, data can follow FAIR principles but not be entirely open. So if your data contains sensitive information, you can have restrictions on who can access the data, how it can be shared, sometimes just publishing the metadata and not the full data set. Regardless, what you do share should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And then I'm going to spend a few minutes going over some features of the Arctic Data Center that pertain to ethical research practices and considerations. Not so much to promote that you use these services unless you're, of course, submitting to us, but mainly just to encourage you to think about these when you're planning your own projects and you're conducting your own research. So a unique practice of the ADC is the implementation of ethical research practice statements and data sensitivity tags. So when submitting data to us, we require that all researchers provide a statement of ethical considerations that they've taken in their work. Um, some of these can include following the CARE principles, getting an institutional review board approval for your project, making sure that you have consent waivers when needed, that there's co-production of knowledge, that there's data sovereignty, and then, if needed, that your data is anonymized so that it can be published safely. We also require that researchers flag their data with the level of sensitivity, and this ranges from data that does not include any sensitive or protected information, data that is sensitive but has minimal risk because it's been anonymized or summarized, or data that is sensitive and could cause harm or violate statutes. So currently, we do not accept data that's significantly risky. So we urge researchers to find ways that their data can be openly published, like anonymizing it or de-identifying locations or names, and still publishing at least the metadata with us. So there's a link to our website at the top of this slide, and here we provide resources for ethical considerations for various fields of research. Although we're the Arctic Data Center, these are applicable to all regions. So we have resources on ethical considerations for all researchers, for archaeological and paleontological research, marine science, physical sciences, plant and soil research, spatial data, and wildlife sciences. I also want to note that this page is kind of a constant work in progress, so we love hearing from people about things that we might be missing here or that we should add. So if you see anything, please reach out to us. We'll have our email at the end of the presentation, and we would love to hear from you. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Angie for our breakout activity.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nicole. Um, instead of just continuing this conversation about metadata and FAIR principles, we're going to do this small group activity where we're going to evaluate a real data set. So we're going to go ahead and work with this one that's linked here that Madison also just pinned in the chat. Um, and the goal is to get into small groups and review this data set using this rubric that we linked here. And also make note that when using this rubric, just go ahead and make a copy of it. So not actually writing in this version that we have here. And then our goal is to assess the quality of the documentation of the metadata in this data set. So when clicking it open, you're going to want to go ahead and also make sure that you're viewing the full metadata rather than just the summary. And we're going to work together in groups until 40 minutes past the hour to evaluate this data package. And then once we're done, we're going to come back together and choose one person from your group to briefly just summarize some of the main takeaways using these questions that we also have here that we'll be using for the whole group discussion. So with that, if there's not any questions, I think we'll go ahead and get into breakout groups.
Angie and Nicole, do you mind if I just post those questions into the chat so people have them when they go into breakout groups?
No problem. Yeah, that's
Cool.
good.
Might be slightly too late as people are going into breakout groups, but that's okay.
You're good. Okay, hopefully that small group activity was pretty helpful and engaging. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move into our whole group discussion. So ideally before you selected a spokesperson from your group just to go ahead and answer these two questions that we have here. So, how easy or challenging was it to find the metadata or the other documentation you were evaluating? And do you feel like you understand the research project enough to use the data yourself or recreate the project? And if you had extra time to think about these, um, if the data packages uphold the FAIR principles, which is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So without further ado, if we could have a spokesperson from group one, maybe just quickly discuss some of the things you might have discovered while participating in the activity.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I did see the number one on my breakout group on the way in.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, so we thought it was pretty good going through. I felt like I wrote good in the comments box pretty often. Moving through I thought the template itself was easy to flow through on the the Arctic data center webpage itself. It was like, oh, good. I don't know, I know where to look for things. Um, we thought maybe the abstract was a little detailed, and maybe didn't explain exactly what the data. I think I learned more in the data table or in the learning about what the data table had in it. I learned a little bit more about the data than I did in the abstract, which meant you had to dig a little bit, but I think that was okay. And we got what else did I write in here? We thought the data usage was actually kind of confusing. Like how to use the data was felt like a little bit like reading a terms and conditions document. And it had said to send your manuscript to the PI before you can use their data. And I was kind of I don't think I've ever seen that before. To actually have to send your data to them to be able to use their data, we thought was kind of interesting. And maybe not that may personally dissuade me from using it. And I think we maybe didn't get as far enough to answer the second question about um, if we understood the research project. But I mean, reflecting just personally now, not really speaking for my group as much, that oh yeah, right on is Antarctic. That I think these people probably went to a stream and measure all the, I don't know. Yeah, I feel like I feel like it gives a pretty good description of what it's doing. Um, And then for the second part, this like third question is thinking about the keywords that were used was when we found the word like disturbance in there, thinking if it was like if they were doing a good, I mean, that was thinking about the care principles a little bit too, about like how well they were leaving no trace and interacting with like people. But in Antarctica, again, you're not going to have locals or people to consider. Okay, that's what we got for our group. Please chime in, other group members, if you felt like that was not accurate.
No, I think that was pretty good, Carly. Thank you for sharing. All right, maybe somebody from group 2. If anyone from group 2 wants to go ahead and just chime in, feel free to unmute.
Sure. We did not plan ahead, and so I guess I can jump in. Yeah. Kind of going through these questions, we found that it was pretty easy to find the metadata and documentation. We really liked the like column descriptions that we found that really helpful. We did find the like large wall of text rather hard to navigate. And there were definitely some like we think it was like copy and pasted in, so like some characters might have not have been transferred correctly, so that made things a little bit difficult, but the information seemed to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, let's see. And then did we understand the research project? I kind of again, feel free to chime in if you disagree, but I think we all felt that like we did feel that like we understood the data enough that we could reuse it. We really liked that while it was kind of confusing, there was a like intellectual rights statement. So feeling comfortable that like if we were to use it, we would know how and that we were allowed to. Um, and then what were some of the other things that we talked about? Um, yeah, I think looking through it, we didn't find a clear like ethics discussion. So that was something we were looking for and couldn't really find. Um, but did find that like the other FAIR principles seemed to be pretty present.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Karina, and what you discussed within your group. Um, and if anyone in group 3 has any thoughts to go ahead and share, feel free to unmute.
I would
Jonathan,
say
you
that
were
our,
in group 3, just to answer the question in the chat. Sorry. Go ahead, Katrina.
yeah, um, and Jonathan can chime in too, but I feel that our group agreed with a lot of what has been said. Just adding on a few things that I noticed was maybe that the dates between the title and in the metadata seemed a little bit different. So I noticed that in the title there's January, but the metadata shows November and December. So I wondered about that. Um, Overall, I think the reusability is pretty good, but digging into it, I think maybe the title and the abstract could align more to capture what was happening. Um, yeah, I wondered if those could come together a little bit more.
I'll just add that I think we didn't cover as much ground as the other groups, but we were looking in more detail. So we spent probably 10 minutes talking about the spatial coverage. And so that just goes to show there's a lot of thought that can go into this. And, not clear on who generated the metadata, how much time they actually spent on preparing this page. So it might not be fair to be picking over it with a fine-tooth comb.
Yeah, thank you both, Katrina and Jonathan, for sharing. All right. Anybody from group 4 maybe have a spokesperson just to go ahead and chime in about things you might have discussed?
Yeah, we split up between questions 1 and 2. So very quickly to answer question 1, I agree with Jonathan on or the other groups, I agree that it was navigable, like the web page was navigable, and therefore we could also see what information was missing pretty quickly. So, for example, not all full contact information was present.
Hmm.
And additionally, like the spatial, being able to replicate it might be difficult considering the spatial like boundary lines were really just like one pinpoint. So where sampling occurred was unclear. But the page itself was navigable and like the way that they filled it in made that pretty easily identifiable. And then I'll pass it on to Erica to answer the second question.
Yeah, thanks, Maya. For the second question, I think neither of us, this is our field. So thinking through, I thought that the data was clearly described, but knowing I probably wouldn't be going out and reproducing it myself, so I don't know kind of the level of detail that would be required for reproducibility. But thinking through how this type of data could be used. I'm more on the social science side, so thinking about how it could inform some um, questions and things. I think that it is described clearly kind of for that purpose. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Maya and Erica, for both sharing. I love the sense of teamwork I saw within the groups of helping one another. And then I think we just have our last group, group 5, if anybody wants to go ahead and chime in.
Yeah, don't have a ton to add. Definitely agree with what Erica was just saying that for us, this isn't our field. And so we were like, yeah, this is probably enough information for someone who knows what they're doing. But we did our best to go through anyway, and it looks for the most part like most of the information was there. We also couldn't find any sort of ethical statement. And in my experience with other fields, usually even if there are no ethical concerns, there's usually a statement just like, hey, we're good, to show that you did think about it. Um, and then as far as interoperable, I'm not super familiar with all of the software. And so I don't know if that Otis software, if that's, it didn't seem proprietary because it seemed like it was downloadable. But I don't know if the output files from that are interoperable with other systems. So that was, I think, one of the questions that I had that maybe somebody more familiar in the field would know better. But yeah, I think going last, other groups already said a lot.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Megan. Um, Yeah, so I think what this exercise just really shows is that metadata isn't just a box that we're checking, and it can really make a difference between the data that's just sitting in a repository versus like data that someone can actually reuse. So we intentionally chose this data set that is a bit old to have something that's comparable to standards we're currently assessing. There are things in this data set that a lot of you mentioned that are missing. And it shows that even the smallest things can make the biggest difference, like whether that's having clearer variable names or better method descriptions or obvious licensing, like it can really change how confident others might be in reusing the data. And for the Arctic Data Center, our goal isn't to just host files like Nicole mentioned previously. Like we really work to support science that people can build on. And that happens when the documentation is strong. And we have a big role in helping with curate data. And at the end of the day, good metadata is about making sure your work is understandable and useful over the long term after you moved on from that project. And that can really be done when following things like the FAIR principles. So hopefully everyone enjoyed the breakout group activity or at least got you thinking about other things that you could be implementing in your own research or in your groups um, when working on different research projects. Yeah, with that, I'll go ahead and move on to these resources. So we have these 4 resources on here, all with different uh, goals. One of them is the FAIR Principles for Scientific Data original paper. And then the Arctic Data Center also has a lot of resources on ethical research practices or other resources that you can use when thinking about good metadata quality and documentation. And we also have more on ethical data procedures. So I think these slides will be shared, but if not, there are QR codes here for you to follow. And then we also have a link to the CARE principles from the Global Indigenous Data Alliance. And with all that, thank you so much for spending the last hour with us. We currently just opened up our 2026 community survey, which is intended to really assess how good the Arctic Data Center is and if there's anything that we can currently improve on, whether that's our services, tools, or resources that we have available for Arctic researchers. I understand maybe we could have a mix of Arctic and Antarctic researchers in this call today. But if you've ever used the Arctic Data Center, and you have some feedback that you would love us to implement, please feel free to uh, participate in our survey. We'll have it open until March 25th, and it is accessible on our website. You can easily find it on there. And then I don't know if there's anything else to add, Nicole.
No, that was great. Thanks, Angie. And Madison put the link in the chat, so you can see that as well. But we'll pass it off to either Mariama or Madison to wrap it up.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Also, as I'm sure you all are aware, everyone on the call is aware, breakout groups are only as good as like how people show up in them. So I'm really thanks for showing up in an engaged way. And I hope I was seeing some notes in the chat that meeting other folks on the call was pretty fun. So stay connected. I fully encourage that. And thank you so much to the Arctic Data Center, to Angie and Nicole. We hope that you found this event useful, and we encourage you to attend future PSECCO events. One that's already on the calendar, if you do fieldwork, is planning safe and effective field campaigns. And that's a panel discussion that'll feature quite a few folks from the Antarctic, but also at least one panelist, if not 2, from the Arctic or who do work in the Arctic. We also will have another event coming up on mental health and climate change. So if that's of interest to you, please keep an eye out on our website for that. That'll be happening in April. And we have an opportunity, or you have an opportunity, to read and endorse the PECWIS report, which is the Polar Early Career World Summit, a report that was developed from and by and from the early career community, giving recommendations to the broader polar community around how to do things research better. And open science ethical data practices is highlighted in that PECWIS report. So if you're not familiar with it, please have a read and feel free to endorse it if you want to put your name behind the broader polar community taking that seriously and lead up to the 5th International Polar Year. Also, you can stay up to date on anything PSECCO is doing by subscribing to the PSECCO newsletter if you're not already, and or by joining the PSECCO community Slack and interacting with other members of the Polar Early Career community on that Slack. We've just put a post there encouraging people to connect with one another via Instagram if you have a science Instagram. So yeah, engage with that if you'd like to. And finally, we'd love your feedback. So please do take a look at the survey that Angie was mentioning, but we also would love your feedback on this event specifically. And so please fill out the post-event survey to tell us how this could have been better or what you loved about it. Thanks so much again, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. And we hope to see you soon on another PSECCO event call. Bye.